let's get started. So hi, everyone. Welcome to the Keynote Presentation, which is the last section of today's summit. My name is Stan, and I'm from the University of Southern California, and I will be the host of the keynote. So first, please allow me to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Bountra. Professor Bountra is one of the pro-vice chancellors at the University of Oxford, professor of translational medicine in the Nuffield Department of Clinical Medicine, and associate member of the Department of Pharmacology. Professor Bountra is also visiting professor in neuroscience and mental health at the Imperial College London. He's a pioneer of drug discovery, especially to deal with Alzheimer's disease and cancer, etc. So Professor Bountra, thank you so much for being here today, and we are so excited to dig into your thoughts on healthcare, drug discovery, and more. We will also have a short Q&A section after your speech, so please feel free to start.
Stan, thank you so much, and Nikki also, and Xifeng, thank you for the invite, and ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are, etc. So I hope you can hear me okay. You know, I've just been having a brief conversation with Stan and Nikki and Xifeng, and I have to say I feel enthused when I talk to youngsters like yourselves. And now what I want to do today, I mean, I could probably sum up the talk in my title. I believe that patients all over the world, healthcare providers, you know, so that could be governments, it could be pharmaceutical industries, etc. Industries, societies, governments all over the world, they are looking to people like yourselves to come up with solutions to some of the biggest challenges we're facing. They are looking to great universities that I'm sure you're all involved in. They're looking to great researchers, great leaders, great entrepreneurs, great innovators, polymaths to come up with solutions to many of the world's challenges. What I'll do is I'll say a few words about this pandemic and maybe some of my own reflections or thoughts or learnings, etc. I'll share with you another challenge that I worry about, and that is trying to come up with more affordable medicines. And then I'll sum up, and I'll just finish with a story from Oxford around the Oxford vaccine, and then I'll try and sum up. So in this pandemic, I mean, this is something that we are all worrying about 24/7. It's affecting all of us. It's completely changed our lives. You know, so far, you know, we're what, 7, 8, 9 months into this pandemic, and we've had close to 40 million people across the world being infected. More than 1 million people have died. Tens of millions of people have been affected, you know, because of loved ones being dying or, you know, just being infected. I mean, it has destroyed the lives of many people. I was just saying to Xifeng and Stan and Nikki that you know, many countries are going into recession because of this. Many more will go into recession. Even in the UK, in the next few months, we're going to see unemployment go up because of this pandemic. It was interesting, back in June, you know, I read a paper, and it was something like, in Belgium, for every 100,000 people that were infected, 80 were dying. In Germany, that number was 10. In Japan, that number was 1. In Singapore and Taiwan, it was 0.1 or less. And at the time, I'm thinking, why have we got such big differences? You know, this is almost 1,000-fold difference between, say, Belgium and Singapore or Taiwan. There must be something we can learn from them. I think this pandemic has magnified many things that you and I are already aware of, but, you know, certain things have become more magnified. For me, one of the big things has been that we all as human beings, we're very social animals. You know, if we are connected with each other, we are happier. If we are isolated, there's a chance, you know, you will be depressed or have other sort of mental health conditions. You know, actually shaking hands and hugging each other is a good thing. And that's been an interesting one for me. The other thing, and I was just talking to Nikki about this, I mean, sort of, and Stan and Shifeng, I mean, sort of, many times, you know, we've thought about sort of patients going to see their physicians on the laptop, you know, sort of not actually going there sort of face to face, but just having a consultation on laptops. And it's only really in the past 6, 7, 8 months that it's really started to happen here in the UK at scale. And I think it's made things easier for many patients. I don't know whether it's increased access. It probably has reduced costs a little bit. It'll be interesting to see whether the quality of the interaction has been the same. But I think in general, I think many diagnoses can be done virtually. So I think telemedicine has really taken off. I think the other thing that we've all sort of really recognized is that data is incredibly important. And actually data around what's happening to our neighbors is incredibly important. Neighborhood data is public good. You know, it allows us, if we can get that data, we can model impacts. We can see that if we've got infections shooting up in a particular area, what's going to be the impact on that area? We can think about the impact on the local hospitals. We can think about, have we got sufficient capacity in terms of beds or PPE, etc. So data is incredibly important. I think the other thing that many of us have realized is that to collect that data, you need trust. So if whoever's collecting that data is not trusted, then people are not going to be willing to give their personal data. So trust is important. Another lesson for me has been around the planet. We have to look after the planet. We cannot ruthlessly carry on exploiting the resources of the planet. You know, what's been happening over the past several decades, probably centuries, as a consequence now we've got this erratic weather. The air has become polluted, land has become polluted, the oceans have become polluted. When we had the lockdown here in the UK in March, it was interesting that sort of many people said the sky seems a lot bluer. You know, there's less pollution. Certain species have made a comeback. We have to look after the planet for future generations, for yourselves and your children and so on and so forth. I think the other big lessons are about the future. You know, we have to be prepared for the next pandemic, frankly. There will be another one. We need to be better prepared. We absolutely need much, much more global cooperation. You know, it's interesting, this virus started on one side of the world and it's gradually moved right across and it's affected the whole planet. We have to work together to develop new vaccines. We have to work together to make sure that all of us have got access to sufficient protective equipment. As a human race, we will sink or swim together. The other thing is we have to invest in healthcare and we have to invest in education. I know there's a lot of investment in healthcare, but frankly, we need more. I don't think there's anything more important than the health of us. Education, it's interesting, when we went into lockdown here in the UK in March, we've now seen what the impact of that has been on school kids not being able to go to school. You know, the impact in terms of mental health and their well-being, etc. Education is incredibly important. And we also need to ensure that we have a safety net for our poor people. They will always be the ones who are most affected. And that could be in the UK, it could be in India, it could be in China, it could be in South Africa, it could be in the US, it doesn't matter. We need a safety net for the poor. I'm an optimist, and I believe that we, especially with people like yourselves, will learn from this. And I believe we will break down the walls between different countries, between different institutions, between academia and government, or academia and industry, etc., etc. We have to break down these walls, and I'll touch on this a little bit later. I've always thought that raising a child is a team effort. I'm increasingly thinking that life is a team effort. Now, fortunately, as many of you realize, in the UK, we're now entering the second wave. Now, fortunately, I think our healthcare workers are better trained. Back in February, January, we didn't really know much about this disease or this virus. We now know a lot more about it. So our people are better trained. I think we have our healthcare systems are better equipped. I think we've got better diagnostics. We've also got better treatment options. Thanks to the great work of some of my colleagues here in Oxford, Martin Landry and Peter Hornby, they have shown that dexamethasone, this generic, this cheap anti-inflammatory that has been available for I don't know how many decades, is effective. It can reduce deaths by 30%. And they've also shown that, the anti-malaria drug, hydroxychloroquine, is ineffective. So, this works. So I think we're better prepared. I think also, I know some countries already had sort of test and trace capabilities and digital apps, etc. I think those are now available in many, many more countries across the world. And so now we are able to see where the virus is, where the virus is being transmitted, and we can do something about it. So knowing where it is and how it's being transmitted, or where it's being transmitted, we can do something about it. So for example, is it being transmitted in care homes or hospitals or pubs or restaurants or households, etc., etc. So this is incredibly important. And of course, this is the one thing we can do in the absence of a vaccine. So I think we're better prepared than we were in March. Earlier I was talking to Stan, and I asked Stan and Nikki and Shifeng, what do they worry about? And one of these great individuals said to me that they were worried about sort of education and politics. And I was thinking about this, and I have worried in recent weeks, for example, in the US, when the president of the US got infected, a few days later, fortunately he recovered, but I think his behaviors have led some people to believe that this is a benign disease. It is not a benign disease. It is benign for young people like yourselves, but clearly 1 million people have already died across the planet, and this has destroyed the lives of tens of millions of people across the planet, including their families, etc., etc. This is not a benign disease. So that's something I do worry about. I also worry in general that across the planet, we are facing some massive challenges. The pandemic is a massive challenge, but I tell you, it's nothing compared to climate change. That is something that could just, well, the implications of that are just, you know them, they're just massive. You know, I think, you know, we have polluted the planet. Demand for more energy, for more food to feed everybody, more clean water, more affordable medicines. These are massive challenges that we need to tackle. I mentioned affordable medicines. Now, what I'll do in the next few minutes is just share a few words around that, because this is an area that I know a fair bit about. Now, in terms of affordable medicines, you know, I worry that firstly, as a biomedical community across the planet, we are not producing enough new medicines. I think we need lots more new medicines. I also worry that when we do produce new medicines, they are becoming increasingly unaffordable. And I'll touch on that later on. In biomedical research, I'm worried that there is a lot of duplication. There are many labs across the world, in academia, in industry, doing almost exactly the same thing in parallel, in secret. I think that duplication is potentially wasteful. I think a certain amount of duplication is necessary to verify science and data, etc. But I think there is too much duplication. And I also worry about that sort of when I talk to some of my colleagues in industry, they say that they cannot reproduce many academic publications. So I think we need to think about that. Reproducibility of data is incredibly important. So I'll touch on that. Before I do that, let me just sort of reflect a few things. Let's just think from us, you know, we are researchers, you know, we're fortunate to work in nice universities surrounded by nice people and nice teachers and everything else, etc. What do people expect from us? You know, what do patients want? What do their relatives want? What do their carers want? What does society expect from us? I think what they want is they want more novel medicines. They want more effective medicines. They want more affordable medicines, and they want them quickly. So let me just touch on some of those just to illustrate. Now, I'm sorry, I have numbers for the UK and I don't have them for the world, but sort of I hope they'll just sort of put into context. I'm sure the challenges are the same in every country across the planet. Now, in the UK, our population is about 67 million. Now, in the next 12 months, in the UK, 350,000 people will get diagnosed with cancer. That is 1,000 people every day. That is one person every 90 seconds. That is 14 million people across the planet in the next 12 months will get diagnosed with cancer. Half of us during our lifetime will have a diagnosis of cancer. We need more cancer therapeutics. You know, Stan works on dementia. And so let me just say a few words about that. So again, in the UK today, we have about 850,000 people with dementia. So bear in mind our population, 67 million, so nearly 1 million people with dementia. Now, the incidence is such that all of us who live to more than 80, 1 in 6 of us will get it. In the year 2050, 3 decades away, it's estimated that in the UK, we will have 2.1 million people with dementia. The average cost today in the UK of caring for a dementia patient is about £32,000 a year. And that's despite the fact that 2/3 of the costs are borne by the relatives. But it's costing the state about £32,000 a year on average to look after these dementia patients. Now, if you add all of that up, we are spending £26 billion a year looking after our dementia patients. Now, incidentally, 26 billion is if you take all of the household energy bills in the UK, all of the household energy bills, that's about 26 billion. We are spending as much on looking after our dementia patients. And these patients, the number is going to double in the next 3 decades, more than double in the next 3 decades. We've not developed a new drug for Alzheimer's since 2002. And that drug only works in the first 12, 18 months. It's a symptomatic treatment because then after that, as the disease progresses, it stops working. We desperately need new treatments for dementia. And this is a disease, frankly, that I think, I said to Stan earlier, I think it's going to financially cripple many societies. It's a big problem. Now, mental health. You know, many pharmaceutical companies have just pulled out of mental health because psychiatric disease, you know, it's just incredibly difficult. We don't have good animal models. We don't have good biomarkers. When we do clinical studies for psychiatric disease, most of the studies fail, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not surprising that industry is pulled out. But mental health, it's estimated that a quarter of all adults at some stage in their life will have some sort of mental health episode. In Europe, it's estimated that there's 83 million people with some sort of mental health condition. It's estimated that during our lifetimes, 20% of people will have some sort of depressive episode. And I heard some shocking figures recently that in the UK, if you take young ladies aged about 15, out of every 150, one will be anorexic. So there's almost a 1% incidence of anorexia in 15-year-old girls. It's shocking. Now, of course, across the planet, we've got aging societies. In the next 20 years in the UK, the number of individuals with number of pensioners with medical conditions is going to more than double. There's going to be, in the next 20 years, a 180% increase in the number of pensioners with cancer. And there's going to be a 120% increase in the number of pensioners with diabetes. So this is a tripling or a doubling of these conditions. In the UK, we have a brilliant lady named Sally Davis, who used to be our chief medical officer. She's now the president of Trinity College in Cambridge. And for the past 6, 7, 8 years, she has highlighted the problem around that we are becoming resistant to existing antibiotics. So the numbers are, across the world at the moment, about 700,000 people a year are dying because they are resistant to existing antibiotics. In the year 2050, that number is estimated to be 10 million. And by 2050, if we don't come up with a new generation of antibiotics, it's going to cost, in loss of GDP, something like $100 trillion across the world. These are phenomenal numbers. I've talked here about a lot of sort of common conditions, but if I think of rare diseases, so here in Oxford, my colleague Wyatt Yu, who's a brilliant scientist, he's been putting together some large resources to work on rare diseases. Now, across the world, there are 7,000 rare diseases. If you add up all the patients with a rare disease, that's more than 350 million patients. 30% of those children do not reach the age of 5. It takes on average 6 to 8 years to get a diagnosis, and 95% of those individuals have no treatment. Can you imagine being the parent of a child with a rare disease and there is no treatment? And 95% of these individuals have no treatment. We desperately need new treatment. Let me share with you a personal story, because, you know, sometimes things happen in life and we always remember these things. And one of them, about 3-4 years ago, I was giving a public lecture here in Oxford. It was on a Sunday morning, and just immediately before lunch. And at the end of this lecture, this lady came up to me and she said, "Professor Bountra, my daughter died with a brain tumor last year. If you would like to study her brain, this is where you can get it from." And she hands me this scrap of paper, and on this paper was written her daughter's name, her date of birth, the day she died, and where her brain was stored. Afterwards, my wife came to pick me up and take me home, and I said to her that a complete stranger has just offered me the brain of her dead daughter. This is how desperate parents, carers, relatives are, you know, for new treatments. So we need novel treatments for a number of these conditions. Earlier, I said we need more effective treatments, and you might think, well, why is he saying that? Aren't all the drugs that are out there effective? Well, there was a study that was published a few years ago looking at solid tumors. And they looked to see, of the treatments we had for solid tumors at the time, so there were 71, they looked to see what was the average increase in progression-free survival or overall survival in these cancer patients. And they found that with these 71 drugs, the average increase in progression-free survival was 2.5 months, and the average increase in overall survival was 2.1 months. And they found that of those 71 drugs, only 30 of them had clinically meaningful efficacy. So although these drugs were out there, they were being marketed, more than half of them did not have clinically meaningful efficacy. We need more effective treatments. Now, I also said we need more affordable treatments. And again, this is a publication that had numbers from the UK. And so what they did was they looked at, in the year 2000, the drugs that we had available in the UK for treating cancer. And at the time, we had 69 drugs for treating cancer. Of those, 50 of them were cytotoxic treatments. The average duration of treatment was 181 days. The average cost of that treatment was £3,000. And in the year 2000, they equated £3,000 to 20% of our GDP per capita. They did the same analysis in 2013-14, so more than a decade later. At that point, we now had a further 63 treatments for treating cancer, so that's good. But the average duration of treatment was now 263 days, so it's gone up from 181 to 263. But the average cost of the treatment was now £35,000, so it's gone up from 3,000 to 35,000. And 35,000 equated to 140% of our GDP per capita. So it's gone up from 20% to 140%. And that trend is continuing. Now, many of you have probably seen some of the gene therapies that have been launched in the past 2-3 years. So a company called Spark Therapeutics 2 or 3 years ago launched a new gene therapy for a rare form of vision loss. And they are charging $1 million per patient. About a year or so ago, Novartis launched a new treatment for spinal muscular atrophy. So again, this is a gene therapy, a single injection. And they are charging $2.125 million for that injection. So more than $2 million for this gene therapy produced by Novartis. Now, of course, you know, I'm not criticizing Novartis because I appreciate how challenging and difficult drug development is. And I also appreciate how this gene therapy is completely changing the lives of these young individuals, etc. So, you know, I think all of us, if we had $2 million and we had a child with that disease, we would give them that gene therapy. For me, the big lesson is that we need to drive down the costs of gene therapy. You know, it needs to be 100-fold cheaper at least. So that's what we need to do so that it's available to anybody who wants it. I also said we need treatments quickly. And of course, if you're a patient or a carer or a relative, you know, tomorrow is too late. You want it today. So I think people are looking to us for more novel treatments, more effective treatments, more affordable treatments, and they want them quickly. Now, the challenge we've got is the way that we're doing drug discovery today. I believe it's incredibly inefficient. And so let me just illustrate that quickly. So I think it's too costly, I think it's too risky, and I think it's too slow. So let me just say a few words on each of those. Everybody, if you look at most of the recent publications, they're estimating that the average cost of taking a drug to the market is somewhere in the region of $3-4 billion. Now that is unsustainable. A few years ago, there was a publication, I think in 2003, across the world, we had 529 molecules in development for cancer. And what in this study they did was look to see what happened to those 529 molecules a decade later in 2014. And they found that 45 of them had made it to the market. So when I say they're in development, I mean they're in either phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3 clinical studies. So they found 45 of them had made it to the market. That's great. 95 were still in development, but 389 molecules were terminated. So we as a biomedical community took 389 molecules into patients and then terminated them. Can you imagine the resource that went into that, the number of the effort, the number of people who devoted many years of their lives to pushing those molecules, and it resulted in no medicine. So we need to reduce that wastage. In that same study, they showed that if a molecule is in phase 1 for cancer, what's the probability it will get to the market? And they concluded that only 7.5% of molecules in phase 1 make it to the market. So less than 10%. So phase 1 of the early safety studies in healthy volunteers, less than 10% of those molecules makes it to the market. And then they looked at if a molecule is in phase 3 for cancer, what's the probability it will get to the market? And the answer was 33%. So only 1 in 3 molecules in phase 3, which are the final registration studies, only 1 in 3 makes it to the market. This is a very risky business. It's also very slow. So a couple of my colleagues a few years ago published a paper looking at sort of how long does it take to take an idea from the lab into the clinic? And the answer was anywhere between 6 years and 30 years, 30. This is too slow. The way we're doing drug discovery, it's too costly, it's too risky, and it's too slow. So you might ask the question, why? Why is that? I mean, this industry employs some of the smartest people on the planet. We've got brilliant clinicians and brilliant researchers and brilliant students working on this. Why is it so risky? I think there's lots of reasons. There's science and then maybe organizational, and I'll just comment a bit on both of those. So science, for many diseases, I believe we don't really have a good understanding of that disease at the molecular level. We don't really understand if an Alzheimer's patient comes in to see Stan. I don't think we can say at the molecular level what's causing the symptoms in that individual. And that's what we need. We need a good understanding of the molecular causes of the phenotype that we see in these patients, etc. And I think for many diseases, our understanding of disease is very poor. I also think for many diseases, we don't have good biomarkers. You know, if you're doing a study in Alzheimer's, you can't say to the patient, oh, is your memory better today than it was last month? Or you can't say to a depressed patient, oh, are you less depressed today than you were last week, etc. We need better biomarkers. I also am not a fan of animal models. I believe they have a place. They allow us to test hypotheses in an in vivo setting, if you like, in physiological in vivo setting. But I have seen many things work in animal models, inverted commas, and then when we take them into the clinic, they do nothing. I think in general, animal models often are misleading. They do not predict what happens in patients. I also worry that for many drugs that are already out there that we are using, we don't know how they work. So of course, if you don't know how existing drugs work, how can you design better ones? So paracetamol, acetaminophen, I'm sure we've all taken it. Probably today, 100 million people across the planet will take paracetamol. Do you know, we do not know what the molecular target for paracetamol is. So there are major scientific challenges. I also worry about the organizational challenges. So I worry that there is a lot of duplication. As I said earlier, lots of academic labs, lots of companies, they're working on the same target in parallel, in secret. And of course, we know when we take that target or idea into the clinic, more than 9 times out of 10, it fails. So most of our ideas do not make it to the market. Most of them fail at phase 1, phase 2 studies in patients. So of course, you know, if there's 20 companies working on the same idea, the same target, if one of them fails, it's likely the other 19 are going to fail as well. And I think that is wasteful. It's a waste of resources, it's a waste of people's careers, but it's also a waste of patients. Can you imagine we are dosing patients with molecules that maybe other competitors, other companies already know are destined for failure? Now, you could argue ethically, morally, that is wrong. I also worry about reproducibility. And like I said at the start, you know, some of my colleagues in industry have said to me, and there's been a number of publications in recent years, that when they look at academic literature, 50, 60, 70% of the time, they cannot reproduce that data. Now, some of that, of course, is because of biological variation, but we need to give attention to that. We need the reproducible data, because only then can industry take that published data and do something with it and create impact. So these are some major challenges. Let me share with you just very quickly some of the things that we've been trying to do in Oxford to tackle some of these challenges. Because of course, it's always easy to identify problems. The difficulty is actually coming up with solutions to those problems. And so this is where I think, you know, we need to work together. We need to sort of exploit all the resources, the creativity, the infrastructure, the expertise that exists across the planet. So what we've been doing to try and change drug discovery, to try and transform drug discovery, to try and accelerate it, is that firstly, we've been pooling resources to share risk. So we've been working closely with 10 large pharmaceutical companies who have given us lots of resources, but importantly, they've given us lots of expertise and compound collections and medicinal chemistry and how you develop assays, et cetera, et cetera. We've also been working with 7 patient groups. And of course, patient groups are very passionate about getting drugs to patients very, very quickly. They're not interested in excuses. They want a new drug today, tomorrow, et cetera. And of course, we've had the benefit of lots of funding from charities and governments, et cetera, et cetera. So we've been pooling resources to share this risk. The second thing we've done is, over the past decade or so, we've said, we're only going to work on completely novel ideas. We're not going to work on things that there's already 100 labs working on and there's already 1,000 publications. We're going to work on completely novel genes and novel proteins. And so what we've been doing is taking these novel genes, novel proteins, and we've been generating early tools, discovery tools. So for example, we've been purifying the protein, the human protein. We've been building assays, biophysical, biochemical assays. We've been working out the structure, the 3-dimensional structure of that protein. We've been designing small molecule inhibitors. We've been generating antibodies. And all these tools that we've been generating, these are very high quality, not because we're clever. They're high quality because we're tapping into the resources, the expertise of these 10 large pharmaceutical companies. And so by working on novel genes and novel proteins and generating novel tools, what we're trying to do is to accelerate innovation. We don't want everybody to work on well-trodden targets or well-trodden ideas. We need to explore new areas of biology, etc. So we're trying to drive innovation. The third thing we've been doing is that all of these tools that we've generated, we've not kept them secret. We've not kept them to ourselves. We've not created patents. What we've done is we've actually shared them with anybody who wants them. We've given them away to anybody in academia, anybody in biotech, anybody in pharma, because I believe that's the best thing we can do to accelerate science and therefore accelerate drug discovery. So we're now collaborating with more than 200 academic labs all over the world. And they take these tools, they look at them in their assays, they produce publications, etc. And then industry looks at those publications and then they can exploit those ideas. So we are using global academia, if you like, to crowdsource science on these novel genes and novel proteins. And the fourth thing we do is that all of this data and all of this knowledge and all of these reagents, we release them to the world immediately. We don't sit on them for 12 months while we're writing up our manuscript, because in those 12 months, there could be other people basically wasting their resources doing something that we've already done. Now that is wasteful. So by releasing everything immediately, we're trying to reduce duplication and reduce wastage. What we've also been doing is developing technologies. We've called it XChem. And this technology allows us to take proteins that are undruggable and make them druggable. So, there are many proteins that we can't identify small molecule inhibitors, but we've developed this platform which uses high throughput crystallography to identify low affinity binders. And this platform we call XChem. So just very quickly, because time is pressing, I'll just quickly say some of the things that we're currently doing. My colleague Dave Stewart and Frank Von Delft, they've set up this project called Moonshot, where they're working on a target for an antiviral, and they've screened it using this XChem platform. They've come up with lots of small molecules that bind to that protein, and then they've released all these molecules to the world. And now a whole community of chemists across the world are working on these molecules to optimize them and to accelerate the generation of a clinical molecule. So very quickly, they've got low micromolar binders for this particular protein. And so they're working on that. So this is crowdsourcing chemistry. We're also working with lots of local clinicians to work on patient-derived assays. We can study cancer cells from patients. We can study immune cells from patients with inflammatory diseases. So we're working very, very closely with the clinicians. We're also setting up a national project to accelerate new therapeutics for aging. So we're working with colleagues at the University of Dundee, the Medicines Discovery Catapult in Manchester, the University of Birmingham, the Crick in London, and ourselves in Oxford. And so this is trying to pool all this expertise and infrastructure and resources to try and tackle a big problem, which is new therapeutics for elderly patients. In Oxford, Richard Cornell, who's an absolute genius, he's the head of clinical medicine in Oxford, his vision is creating a new center for medicines discovery. And so that's what we're building here in Oxford now. We've got a big focus on dementia, mental health. We've got a separate group working on rare diseases, a separate group on inflammatory disease, a separate group on antivirals. And in the future, we intend to build these networks working on cancer, antimicrobials, and cardiometabolic disease. And with each of these, we're working with lots of academic researchers, lots of clinicians, pharma companies, biotech companies, CROs, but also venture capitalists. And with regard to venture capitalists, we're currently in some discussions with some major investors in China and the US about starting some very large projects around healthcare, because we need to put a lot more effort into this. So we're thinking of things around rare diseases, aging, mental health, global health, pandemic preparedness. We're also investing in technologies like digital pathology, computational medicine, and we're also creating a new incubator to allow my colleagues in Oxford to create new companies, so to translate their ideas into the clinic. So to sum up, the solutions to all of these problems, whatever they are, it's down to people like you. Young, smart, enthusiastic, creative individuals. You are the future current innovators, leaders, entrepreneurs. You are the polymaths. You are the people who, with your creativity, genius, and passion, are going to come up with these solutions. All of these solutions are complex. They require bringing together multiple stakeholders. They require developing new technologies. They require developing multinational partnerships. They require a lot of commercial acumen, and they require political finesse. And we're looking to people like yourself to tackle these problems. Let me finish with an optimistic note, which I think illustrates this. So you're aware, in Oxford, we're working with colleagues in AstraZeneca to develop this vaccine. Now, let me just share with you what's happened in the past 6, 7, 8 months. So at the start of this year, a couple of years ago, a couple of my colleagues, Adrian Hill, Sarah Gilbert, brilliant scientists, they set up a company called Vaccitech, basically to develop vaccines. At the start of this year, senior leaders in the university, so our Vice Chancellor, Louise Richardson, who is a phenomenal lady. If you ever get a chance to meet her, please do, because she is awesome. Louise Richardson, the Regius Professor of Medicine in Oxford, is a guy named John Bell. He's the most inspirational man I've ever met. And Gavin Screeton, who's the head of our medical school, and Andrew Pollard, who's a brilliant clinician. These individuals got together with Adrian and Sarah. They pulled in the UK government, they pulled in the regulators, they pulled in our funders, they pulled in AstraZeneca. And all of these people together said, we are going to work together to accelerate the generation of a new vaccine for patients. We need that vaccine as quickly as possible. We're not worried about making profit. We don't care about profit. We need a vaccine as quickly as possible. They had a single vision. And what they have done in the past 6, 7, 8 months normally would take 6, 7, 8 years. So let me leave you with this note. If we come together, we can do the impossible. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, fantastic. So Professor Bountra, thank you for your speech. I'm really grateful that you're here to share your thoughts and ideas with us today. And we are going to open it up to the questions. Some were collected from our audiences. I'm sure that there are many follow-ups on what you have explored. So let's begin. So first question is, let's talk about like the COVID-19 response. So we have seen that many governments worldwide have played a considerable role in it, leading to many different effects and results. What do you think about the role of the government in such pandemic or in the drug discovery in general?
Well, Stan, it's a very important question. It's a great question. You know, for something like this, when you have a crisis, you know, you should not be competing with each other. You need to come together. There's no point criticizing each other or criticizing the World Health Organization. You know, I do believe, especially in a crisis, most people are trying to do the right thing. And most people are trying to save people's lives, reduce the number of deaths, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, you know, we have to come together and create that single vision. Forget competition. It doesn't matter, you know, sort of we need to sort of share our expertise, share our resources, share our infrastructure, and just focus on that one goal. And this is what's been amazing for me with respect to this sort of, the example I gave right at the end around the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Sort of a big pharmaceutical company, the UK government, the regulators, funders, an academic institute, some academic founders who created this company, Vaccitech, came together, bang. And it's, I think, sort of, collaborate, teamwork, humility as well, actually, I think, Stan. I think it's important to recognize what you're good at and what you can't do. And, and recognize that maybe somebody else or some other group can do something you can't. And so I'm not interested for me in science, if somebody else can do something, I'm not interested in duplicating that. I'll just work with them to do it because it's faster, it's cheaper, etc. We have no time to waste. So.
Sure. Just follow up on the last question. So you mentioned a lot of times about collaborations, but as we discussed previously, during the pandemic, actually, we didn't see a lot of collaboration in perspective of the governments or across the country. So let's say, do you think this issue could be solved in the future?
Yeah, I hope so. At the end of the day, it's down to individuals, isn't it? Often. It's not for me to criticize governments or criticize individuals in different governments, etc. But, I just, even, at the start of this talk, I said sort of when I was reading this paper back in June about the number of deaths in Belgium or Germany or Japan or Singapore or Taiwan, it was just a massive difference. And, I think this is where we just need to come together, share our learnings and share, help each other. And I think we need more of that approach in all of these problems that we talked about, Stan. Be it climate change or pollution or energy or food or water or medicines or vaccines or whatever, sort of, there's a time and a place for competition, but, in a crisis, forget competition. You need humility and, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm answering.
Yeah, I really feel that. I really feel that. I believe that it will take a really long process to union all of the world for this kind of major events like the pandemic. Yeah. So
the one thing I would say, Stan, is that individuals can make a massive difference.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders can make a massive difference. I have seen, a individual can completely transform a group or an organization. Equally, a poor leader can destroy that group as well.
Yeah, sure.
But if you look at some of the big successes, I've often thought, I think you mentioned Bill Gates when we were
Yeah.
But I've often thought people who have changed the planet, sort of, and it is people who have changed. Bill Gates has changed the planet. That guy changed the planet when he set up Microsoft, and he's changing the planet for the second time by giving away all his money. And the guy is a genius. I wish we had more people like him, etc. But, it's amazing what an individual can do. Steve Jobs changed the planet. Look at Apple. You could argue Bezos has changed the planet with Amazon. Elon Musk is changing the planet. It's Mark Zuckerberg has changed the planet. And, I'm sure there's individuals like that in China as well. But sort of, it's amazing what an individual can do. They've created new industries. They've created not just a few jobs, they've created hundreds of thousands of jobs. You know, Apple has produced, I don't know, it's probably produced several millionaires and maybe even some billionaires. I don't know. You know, it's amazing what a individual can do. So this
Sure.
is why I say sort of, you know, the future is in your hands.
Yeah.
Leaders, great leaders are selfless.
Cool. And let's move on. So for the third question here, so in the current situation where the financing is difficult, as you mentioned, and the time cost of the innovation is really high, especially for like pharmaceutical industry. So to talk about the cost, I know that for the average single drugs R&D spending for United States pharmaceutical company is like 2 million or 3 million, and it can also up to like 14 million. So it's really, really high. So during this pandemic, the risk will be higher, I believe. So do you think this situation will cause many people dare not to innovate because the risk is so high? So do you think this is a problem?
No, I think, I mean, I think there are companies that are working together to develop these vaccines. And, you know, with the Oxford AstraZeneca, I mean, you've seen an academic organization work with a big pharma company to develop a vaccine. So I think I'm a bit more optimistic that we will see more collaboration. I think maybe in terms of numbers, I mean, I think the numbers are frightening. I mean, sort of to produce a completely novel medicine, it can actually take $3-4 billion, you know, and this is the scale of resource that you need. I mean, Alzheimer's, Stan, I know you worry about Alzheimer's, but let's just share some figures on Alzheimer's. You know, every single phase 3 trial in Alzheimer's over the past 2 decades has failed. And, you know, we've not come up with a new preventative treatment for Alzheimer's or new disease-modifying treatment for Alzheimer's. Many, many labs in academia, in industry, have been essentially working on that same hypothesis that amyloid accumulates in the brain. It leads to death of neurons and cognitive decline and neurodegeneration. Look at how many companies have developed, you know, antibody approaches, BACE inhibitors, et cetera, gamma secretase inhibitors, all basically focused on that one hypothesis, and it's all failed. It's estimated, Stan, you'll know the numbers better than I do, but in the past 30 years, we probably spent close to $30 billion on that hypothesis. $30 billion, and we don't have a drug. And so, you know, this is an example of lots of academics or companies doing their own thing. And this is where when something is so difficult and it's so expensive and it's so risky, we have to come together, you know?
Yes, of course. And last question here, since we have limited time. So with the rapid advancement of the technology innovations, are our thinking become more selfish, isolated, and narrow-minded? So is there a certain connection between the technology innovation and the ideology innovations? So as you mentioned about, there is a lot of fantastic individuals here in America. So for example, like Bill Gates, but I mean, I think the current situation is that a large portion of the American citizens don't want to believe in them. I think that's a problem for United States for now. So do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I think, how do I answer that question? I mean, I'm more optimistic. I mean, obviously, I know the situation much better in the UK. And I mean, I used to work in the pharmaceutical industry. And when I first started in 1988, so this is before you were born, I was working for a company called Glaxo. And at the time, you know, in Glaxo, you know, basically everything we did in the labs in Glaxo was secret. We didn't share it. And what I've seen happen in the past 3 decades There's more and more collaboration between pharma companies and academia. You know, I shared with you what we've been doing here in Oxford for more than the past decade, where we've been working on novel ideas with 10 pharmaceutical companies, and we've been generating these novel tools. And these novel tools, we've made them freely available to lots of academics all over the world, lots of biotechs and lots of pharma companies. So, you know, there's much more of that sharing. I'm encouraged by, you know, the example I gave you, sort of, you know, Oxford and AstraZeneca coming together with this to generate this vaccine and the progress they've made, etc. I think at the end of the day, Stan, I know that there's all these challenges, and, you know, we will always have some people who are driven by self-interest, but this is where I think, you know, people like yourself, passionate, creative, want to create impact. I mean, Nikki said at the start when we were chatting, he cares about impact. You know, this is not just about doing research and producing papers. We want to create benefit for society. We want to help patients. We want to help industry. We want to help the economy. You know, we need to translate the research we do so that it creates benefit for mankind. I think all I've been trying to say is that for some of these global challenges, we really need to come together as a planet. And I do not like these sort of nationalist agendas. And I've worried in the past few years that we have become more and more like that. I hope this pandemic has taught everybody that all these problems, they are global. And I think I said at the start, as a human race, you know, we either sink together or we swim together.
Sure. Absolutely. So I guess that's all for our questions. So Professor Bountra, I would like to thank you again for your being here today, sharing your thoughts and answering our questions.
Yeah. Well, Stan, it's been a pleasure. And like I said, or implied in my talk, sort of, you know, the future is in your hands. So
thank you.
Thank you for everything you're doing. And well, maybe we can find an excuse to work together and do something.
Yeah, of course. Let's keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
And finally, I also would like to thank our audience for today, for their times and being with us. Lastly, don't forget to come back to the next week at the same time. We will bring more interesting panels on different topics. See you guys next week. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.